Hi, good afternoon. Becca, we started? Great. Welcome to the Symposium, Delivering on Climate and Biodiversity Targets Through Better Fisheries Management. This is our closing Fireside Chat, the fourth in a series. So the idea today is we'll heat you up with enthusiasm for a solution to the environmental emergency of biodiversity loss and climate change. Just show the next slide of our fire, of course. We do, of course, have a fireside with us. It is a low carbon virtual fire. Good. So just in terms of, I'm Mike Walker with Our Fish. And today I'm here with my colleague, Rebecca, who's going to be popping in and out now and again. And the idea today is that we're going to discuss how the pioneering science we've heard over the course of this week in the three previous sessions shows how ending overfishing is crucial to delivering action against the biodiversity and climate emergency. But first, about the chat. We have an amazing team of interpreters. So if you like, you can click on the world icon at the bottom of your screen and choose your language, French, Spanish, German, or indeed English. There's not going to be any questions and answer session, but please do, if you would like, make any comments, which then will be recorded. And of course, we'll also have some audience participation with some polls. We'll only take about 45 minutes of your time, which of course is highly valuable and we appreciate it, particularly for those who are calling in or joining us from crazy parts of the world, such as, of course, some of our panelists and Beck. And of course, most importantly, enjoy. So just in terms of a bit of a background to the symposium, if you didn't participate earlier in the week, in the course of the symposium, we have aimed to demonstrate that with an impressive global group of scientists, how ending overfishing mitigates climate change, improves adaptation, and restores ocean health. We have explored the connection between fishing, ocean biodiversity, and climate change, and the ways in which fisheries management is not just about how many fish to kill, but how it is also how we choose to allow the ocean to respond, and whether we choose to let marine biodiversity mitigate the effects of the climate chaos we have unleashed. We have heard how it is not about saying no to fishing, but rather that fisheries management is also ecosystem management. It is responding to climate change. We have heard how without the ocean, there would be no life on the planet. There would be no air to breathe, water, food, or a safe and functioning climate. And it would be over 35 degrees warmer, more like life on Mars. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently said, we have been waging war on the ocean for centuries, and it's as if fishing has now been our greatest weapon. Even in the Northeast Atlantic, around 40% of annual fishing limits are still above scientific advice, and so threatening ocean health. Pressure from other activities like pollution and climate change have been widely studied and acknowledged, but this week has been about exploring how the opposite can also be true, how ocean life can impact positively or mitigate climate change. And we're beginning to understand that instead of being a victim to climate change, the ocean can be, it is, the source of a solution. But destructive fishing is damaging the marine ecosystems, and so is hampering that. How ocean life and ocean habitats sequester carbon. What are the carbon emissions from fishing fleets? Whether fish and marine life sequester carbon and therefore mitigate climate change. These are some of the issues which we have explored this week. Some of the presentations were surprising. The possibilities for restoring our relationship with nature and halting climate chaos through better fisheries management is truly an exciting proposition. The papers presented are part of a series that will be published in Frontiers in Marine Science. In the meantime, this chat and the whole symposium will be available at our.fish. The EU and its member states have a unique opportunity to translate this ocean research into decisive climate action. And so today, around the fire, our virtual fire, we would like to discuss how best decision-making can unlock that solution for potential, or that solution potential of the ocean. And a little like a large cargo vessel that might be stuck or wedged in the Suez Canal, how we can unlock that, how we can unleash it, free it. So who have we got around the fireside with us? I would like to introduce, we have the much revered and infamous Dr. Rashid Sumaila, who's been leading the team of scientists behind the symposium, and on Monday presented Ending Overfishing and Increase the Resilience of the Ocean to Climate Change. Rashid is a University Killam Professor and Canada Research Chair in Interdisciplinary Ocean and Fisheries Economics at the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries and the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia, which means he's got up extraordinarily early this morning to be with us. His research has focused on bioeconomics, marine ecosystem valuation, and the analysis of global issues such as fisheries subsidies, marine protected areas, illegal fishing, climate change, marine plastic, and oil spills. Needless to say, Rashid has been widely published and cited. He won the 2017 Volvo Environment Prize and was named a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada in 2019. His interest in the environment started early in life, when his grandfather used to say, "People should walk as if the ground feels pain." And this is not very far from the truth. Rashid enjoys exploring novel ideas and mentoring future thinkers. He loves waking up each day thinking of how best to contribute to ensuring that we bequeath a healthy ocean to our children and grandchildren so they too can have the option to do the same. Next up, we have Farah Abdallah, an ocean advocate, international campaigner with the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, and founder of Women for Oceans, a global platform that connects and amplifies the work of women in the ocean space. Farah has a Master's of Science and Bachelor of Science, both from the Imperial College in London, with almost 20 years experience in ocean advocacy. Farah has traveled the world observing the beauty of the ocean and witnessing some of the most egregious practices happening at sea. Among her achievements, Farah has executed campaigns to end destructive fishing, worked with affected communities, lobbied for ocean protection, and been deeply involved in exposing fishing crimes, including slavery and labor abuse at sea. Farah's current focus is on protecting the ocean from the looming threat of commercial deep sea mining. Farah is biracial, bicultural, and considers herself a citizen of the world. She lives by the sea in the Netherlands, and Farah strongly believes that by embracing our human diversity, we can turn the tide to our ocean planet. We are extremely lucky to have with us Virginijus Sinkevicius, a Lithuanian politician, but possibly best known to us as the European Commissioner for Environment and Oceans and Fisheries. He's been a member of Parliament of the Republic of Lithuania and Minister of the Economy and Innovation. He completed his undergraduate studies in Aberystwyth, just across the water from me here, where he received a Bachelor of Economic and Social Studies. In 2012, Virginijus was a trainee in the Unit of Regional and Ethnic Affairs at the Office of the Prime Minister in Lithuania. In 2013, he received a Master's of Arts in European Studies from Maastricht. And in 2012-2015, he was an author and editor of the news portal Lithuania Tribune. In 2013 and 14, he served as Assistant Project Manager at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, and has been the project coordinator in the concession project of the Lithuanian airports. He was a team leader of the Group for Improving the Investment Environment in Public Enterprise Investment in Lithuania. And in 2017, he completed a digital policy course from the University of Oxford. And more recently, he's been on record as saying, "I got into politics because I believe in change. The real enemy is indifference." And lastly, but by no means least, is Keller. Ska is a member of the European Parliament and was first elected in 2009. She is a member of the German political party, the Alliance 90, the Greens, and part of the European Green Party. She is co-president of the Greens, and so a member of the Conference of Presidents. She is also a substitute on the PESH committee, so is well versed in what we're going to be talking about today. And Ska, along with Dutch MEP Bas Eickert, led the Greens in 2019 in the European Parliament elections. She's currently serving her third term in office and is future Chancellor of Germany. Okay, cool. Let's get started after all that talk. And Beck, I think we have a poll just to get a sense of who's with us, who's joined us around the fireside. This is for those with me around the fire, so we have a sense of who's listening to us, who's recording us. Well, actually, we're all recorded. So we need to start that poll.
Yeah. Started, it's on, and we're getting an idea about who our 160 or so participants are.
And I should apologize, Ska and Commissioner. I just did a bit of a cut and paste from Wikipedia with a tiny bit of ad-libbing. You're possibly familiar with all that was said. But I'm confident, Ska, about that future position.
All the best.
Yes. Oh, apologies. I have grass being cut. Do we have a result, Beck? Okay.
We do.
Okay, so we have a friendly audience, it would seem, a lot of NGO folk, but still a good proportion of government officials, scientists, and just some good interest. And yes, perhaps also they are the audience is slightly biased in they agree that that fisheries has a role to play in addressing biodiversity and climate change. Good. Nevertheless, we still have much to talk about. So if I could, Rashid, we had, as I explained, we had 3 days. We started on Monday. We had presentations on Monday and Tuesday, and we had a workshop yesterday with policymakers to sort of translate that all out. Could you maybe give us a bit of a summary or a rundown before we then examine some of those points?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the introductions, and thanks to everybody who is participating today. We are grateful for that. This is a long journey. A number of us, about at least 10, 12, 15 scientists came together with the help of our fish, and Beck and Dave have been really central. Mike have been central in helping us come together and start this work, whose main purpose is actually to look, usually all along we've been looking at how climate change affects fish, life in the ocean, and fisheries, but not really much about the other way around, how fishing and what we do on the water, in the water, below the water, can also be part of the climate change effort. So we came together to look at this. And Mike, you did such a great job talking about the various components of the project. And we are about midway in this effort. We've done research, and we are now telling the public what we have done midway, so we get feedback. Then we finalize these papers, and they are going to appear. In fact, the first foundational paper has already appeared, and we are going to have at least 10 to 12 papers published at the end of the day. So this is a big scientific effort, thanks to our fish. And these 3 days, we had about 10 talks, if I got it correct. And it's really amazingly diverse. With these 10 talks, we have approximately the same number of women and men scientists working together, coming up with ideas. And it really, even me, I was surprised at some of the results already that is being reported, that has not been reported before in the scientific literature. So this is turning out to be a really great thing. And we range from basic science, understanding of the ocean, our interaction with it, what it means in terms of carbon release and creation and reduction, mitigation, even adaptation, how you can adapt your fishing to make it work for biodiversity and for climate, right? Beautiful stuff. All the way to the economics. We talked about economics. And by the way, all these are recorded. They're available, or they're going to be available. You get all the details. And so we go into the economics. We talk about shadow pricing of blue carbon, creating markets for blue carbon. And we talked about management, which was quite interesting. We even have a checklist. This just tells you how amazing the work was, from basic science up to the checklist, making sure the elements are there for managers to help ensure that our biodiversity works for fish, and also helps us to mitigate and reduce carbon emission and therefore climate change. So it was quite remarkable kind of setup of results, and I think you will hear more as we go into this the rest of our time today. So I think I'll just turn it back to you, Mike. And
thanks, Rashid. And maybe Beck, could you show us? There's 2 slides from one of the presentations that I think we had on Monday by Emma Cavan of the British Antarctic Survey. Yeah, okay, so here we have one on plankton and fish carbon sink, which, I mean, obviously she used the example of krill, but the important thing here is you see fish contributing to 16% of ocean organic carbon sink. And then the next slide, Beck, was, yeah, okay, so here specifically then, looking at that issue of the carbon sink, you could see that she's looked at the Europe specifically, and how 40% of the global carbon sink is actually in the Northeast Atlantic, but equally so is 15% of the global fishing intensity. And she's identified in her work how trawling, specifically of Atlantic mackerel, herring, and cod, contributes to that. So maybe related to that, one of the questions what we've seen in those slides and in Emma's presentation was how ending overfishing would significantly contribute to improving marine health, and so the ocean's capacity to mitigate the effects of climate change. So one of the questions, which then, as Rashid said yesterday, we had a workshop with policymakers, was how can the EU respond to this? Maybe if I could invite Ska, could you talk to that point?
Yes, thanks, and thanks for the invitation and the great career prospects. I think the European Union indeed can do a lot to help address the problem. We have a lot of the European fisheries is being, so to say, controlled by European policies, and well, the Commissioner is doing his best to make sure it's all going in the right direction in the sense of ending overfishing. I have to say that's not so easy, unfortunately. I mean, as you said, I'm a member of the committee that deals with oceans and fisheries. And let's say that the environmentalist forces don't necessarily always have a majority in that regard. And especially when we talk about, for example, making an emergency stop to fishing over totally overfished species, basically on the brink of extinction, that's not so self-evident as it might sound. There is a big part of political forces that are also very open about that they are that they don't think that reducing fisheries is a good idea, because obviously they have a lot of pressure from the fishing industry, and that's a big industry. And so there's a long way to go. So I think we would have the tools in our hand. I mean, we just voted, or we have, for example, the EU legislation on support for fisheries, on how much fish can be fished, about controlling fisheries. That's a lot of EU legislation, but we need to make sure it's a good legislation. And there we need majorities here in the European Parliament, but we also need it in the national governments, because that's also a problem that we get at the European in the Council, so that the member states will also have to agree with that. So we're far from where we could be. We have the tools, but we need to use them.
Excellent, thank you, Ska. Commissioner, we have the instruments, we have the tools. So we don't need any more tools, or what role can the Commission play in terms of ensuring that those tools are either the best tools, the most appropriate tools, or indeed whether or not new tools are needed?
First of all, good afternoon to everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be with you. Now, to begin with, I think first of all we have our common fisheries policy, which is, I think, a most powerful tool. Yes, probably it needs a review to be more adjusted to nowadays challenges, but full implementation of common fisheries policy I'm pretty sure would definitely is the cure that we at the moment need. Most importantly, that it's fully, you know, balanced and respects all sides. So we have, you know, 3 pillars of the common fisheries policy with social, economic, and of course sustainability corners well covered. And of course, Commission is the one who gets accused usually that one or the other corner is foreseen more. But I can assure you that we're doing a very delicate balancing act to ensure that all of those corners would be sufficiently covered, and of course the balance maintained. And of course, we, as Ka noted very well, there are always quite a tough decisions to be taken, but Commission, first of all, I'm glad that we operate in transparency. Our proposal, which are usually landed on the table, is disclosed, and of course we're always seeking for a result which would be at MSY or at the scientific advice. Absolutely, more needs to be done. We clearly see the need for not only, you know, CFP properly implemented, but we also need to ensure, and now I will speak maybe from the other hat of my portfolio, when we speak about the MPAs, we need to first of all ensure that they are really working and that those areas are sufficiently protected. Of course, we also have to uphold our ambition of biodiversity strategy, increasing the marine protected areas. And in that, you know, in that way, of course, we have to also make sure that it's done not frustrating the fishermen community, finding the balance with them, very well communicating about the benefits of actually MPAs to the fishermen community, and very well communicating about the losses which they might have if certain steps won't be taken.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you explain it, it is a really complex one, and of sort of competing interests, but also with the Commission in a sort of an unenviable role of getting pressure from every side. And maybe Farah, from the perspective of, you know, sort of where's civil society's role in this, and even both in terms of being a supporter. You know, they often talk about, you know, civil society acting in terms of help or harm. And just when we look at this, what Emma presented in those 2 slides that Beck showed us, you could see that there is, it's almost that second slide of the overlap between the sequestration or the carbon sink function and the fisheries function. You can see that almost sort of scientifically, there's an overlap between potentially environmental functions or the functioning of the marine habitat with, of course, then fishing interest.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, yeah.
No, that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thank you also for having me today. And just building on just something that I just heard about the full implementation of the common fisheries policy, I absolutely agree that that needs to happen, and it will go a long way to solving some of these issues. But equally, you know, the EU has come up with so many different directives that address these issues, whether it's the Marine Framework Directive, or whether it's, you know, the deep sea fisheries regulations, or the Birds and Habitat Directive. And so I think the frustration coming, you know, that from civil society, and especially from someone like myself who's been working in this space for so long, is that, you know, we have these instruments, but they're not only not being fully implemented, there's also very little sort of cross you know, pollination or discussion between these directives, if you like. So, you know, we speak about fisheries almost in a silo, and compared to when we speak about, you know, marine protected areas, and these are 2, you know, parts of the same discussion. And what I would like to see, and I think this reflects what civil society would like to see, is better coordination between the different instruments that we have, so that we can truly take this the ecosystem approach and understand what the benefits are to the fishing communities, but also to the coastal communities that depend in many other ways beyond fishing on healthy oceans. And coming to your point, Mike, about the overlap between the fishing and the seabed. I mean, I'm just wearing my hat on about going my deep sea conservation coalition hat on right here. And I think what the science has shown us this week very, very clearly is not just the role of fish and ending overfishing in the fight against climate change, but also the role of the deep sea bed and the sediments on the seafloor, right? We shouldn't disturb that. I think the paper that came out last week in Nature by Salah et al. That showed us very clearly that disturbance to the seabed is basically not a good idea when we're talking about carbon storage and sequestration. So I would very much like to see better coordination between the deep sea fishing regulations and also the looming threat that deep sea mining poses, because that, although we haven't quite understood what that will do to the deep sea bed, we know that disturbing the deep sea bed is going to release and disturb the carbon cycle of the ocean. So
yeah, maybe, sorry, Beck, can you show us, I think it's slide 9, which was presented yesterday, if I recall, by Alex Rogers, which sort of an overlap, Farah. I mean, you mentioned the paper that came out last week in Nature. Yeah, then this one exactly, because I guess there's a challenge in that, for both, Commissioner and SCA as decision makers, that, the EU has made, the EU and its member states has signed up to and made commitments for targets delivery in 2030 and 2050. But of course, then there's the practicality of actually, realizing those targets. And obviously bottom trawling is one where there is evidence that it is destructive, that it has an impact on climate. I mean, last week's paper makes a very strong case for that. And likewise, Alex spoke to that point yesterday. What's the pathway, though, to that's whether, I'm not sure it's a reconciliation. I mean, Rashid, I think you had some points on this yesterday during that workshop. I mean, what's from your perspective as a contributing scientist, where do you see that there is as I say, it's not necessarily a reconciliation, but what's the pathway?
Yeah, so this is, our political leaders here, the member of parliament and the commissioner really articulated some of the issues very well, actually. You have the political pressure, and you have the idea that sustainability has 3 pillars and we have to balance them. So we need to work on those really. And the thing that I always have in my mind is, are these 3 pillars really equal? Is there some hierarchy in it, And this is a debate I have my academic friends in anthropology, sociology who deal with science. And my position, and I'm an economist, is that even though we have these 3 pillars, it's very clear that we need to take care of biodiversity. We need to take care of the fish, because without the fish, there will be no fisheries. This is a truism. I mean, there's no way you can get away from this. So if there's going to be a hierarchy, biodiversity should take priority, because without it, everything else falls away. So that's a very tight constraint that needs to be taken into account. I know it's easy for a scientist to say this, but politically it's tough. You have the pressure, and this is where the political power of politicians comes into place. How to inform, educate, and move society into what we know is what will help people, rather than our narrow, short-term interests. So that's we need a lot of work there to move society. And then this idea of suspension of carbon, I think in economics too, we struggle with this. Most of the time, people go for what they can sell and put the money in their pocket, right? The market values. And that is a lot of the pressure we see is coming from that. But we know about all these other values, right? So again, how can we move society so we are more comprehensive? So what I say about what you said with the overlap, if I own the ocean and I find out that part of the ocean is really a solid carbon storage, it stores a lot of carbon. And that is also where there's spawning of fish. So there are large aggregations. That's the first place I will protect. Now I'll turn that into a double bank, a fish bank where the fish get to grow and then spill over into the other areas. I catch them, whilst at the same time getting the benefit of the carbon storage. We did a calculation of this for the high seas about the carbon value versus the fish value years ago with Alex Rogers, you mentioned him. And we found out that the carbon value is about 10 times the fish value. So that is what we are playing around with. But of course, the fishing sector is more powerful in terms of lobbying and power and pushing the system. So maybe I stop here and hear other voices.
Well, thank you, Rashid. I mean, those are really powerful and compelling points. And so, I mean, Commissioner, I mean, quite simply, I mean, you know, those points that Rashid has made, that Alex presented yesterday in this resuspension of carbon, and that the paper in Nature last week, I mean, I think it even stated that potentially that this bottom trawling is releasing as much carbon as the aviation industry, which, and knowing how much focus and concern there is on aviation, how can the Commission respond to that?
So, first of all, indeed, we have made ambitious commitment both on, you know, how to fight climate change and how to reverse the dramatic loss of biodiversity. And we have two crucial COPs this year, but closely interlinked, and in both oceans, of course, will play a crucial role. In the EU, we have long been aware that the oceans are one of our most valuable resources in environmental, economic, and social terms. And oceans, if managed sustainably and protected sufficiently, are also one of our most powerful allies in the fight against climate change. So restoring biodiversity in the oceans and managing fisheries sustainably is, of course, key. Our common fisheries policy is an instrument that requires us each day to find a balance between these three pillars of sustainability and this twin target of sustainable ecosystems and also sector profitability is exactly the approach we want to promote under the European Green Deal. We must continue pushing for the full implementation of the common fishery policy. We need a culture of compliance in all sea basins. This includes, of course, respecting the ceilings that have been set on the capacity of the fleets to catch fish and the implementation of the landing obligation, which prevents wasteful discards of unwanted catches, as well as improved fisheries control, where digital technology and innovation can play an important role. I cannot repeat, of course, it often enough, but an effective control system is really the precondition for an effective fisheries policy. And this has nothing to do with not trusting, you know, fishermen and women. On the contrary, an effective control system, first and foremost, protects the great majority of them who sticks to the rules. It protects them from unfair competition, from the few that break the rules. So I hope we can work constructively with both the Parliament and the Council to make sure we don't miss this chance to really modernize our current control system and make it fit for the future. Again, the best policy remains toothless if not properly implemented and enforced. So both MSY and the landing obligation are important factors to reduce pressure from fishing on the marine environment. So this would add to our important work to improve selectivity of fishing gear and to protect sensitive species and marine habitats. The action plan, which we will present later this year, will address all these issues, including how we can ensure that we limit the fishing gear that is most harmful to biodiversity.
Apologies for interrupting, Commissioner, but I maybe interpreted a question, or at least I will interpret it as a question maybe for SCA and for the Parliament. And I know that in addition to, of course, the paper in Nature last week, on Monday, at the same time that we were launching this symposium, the Pew Charitable Trusts brought out a report, which I think had seven points or seven perhaps failings of the implementation of the Common Fisheries Policy, which is now, I think, in year 8, perhaps, of implementation. And I think, you know, it's quite a frank report, and I think many of us, I mean, all the sectors represented here on the panel, we all, I think, in some way, you know, have a role to play in the implementation, as the Commissioner has explained. And so I think we all, to some extent, share a degree of responsibility for a lack of implementation. Where do you see the role of the Parliament in terms of not just, I guess, historically, like, okay, it hasn't gone well, but importantly, again, what more can be done in terms of the Parliament contributing to better and fuller implementation, particularly, again, as we move towards these really quite pressing 2030 targets?
Our big problem in the European Parliament, but the same goes for the national governments, is majorities. We right now don't have a majority of parties who would say that biodiversity, ocean health would be their priority. And that's not a secret. Actually, everyone is really open about that in their electoral programs, and they get elected, they get voted for without having any priority for biodiversity, be it in the ocean or out of the ocean. And as long as that doesn't change, as long as we don't have a political majority for biodiversity, for ocean protection or climate protection, it's very hard to do that then afterwards. It needs a lot of public pressure, it needs a lot of outcry. And unfortunately, why the climate, meanwhile, finally has a lobby when it comes to the oceans, when it comes to fish, they hardly have any lobby. That's getting better, I have to say, over the recent years. I think there's really been much improvement in that. But that's the issue. We need to have the political majorities, and we get them by elections, and also by public pressure. I mean, the lobbies that, or the pressure that Rashid mentioned, they're not, a nature law. They're not, they don't arrive and there you go, you can't do anything about it. Yes, I think the political parties are all extremely open about what their priorities are. I mean, as Greens, obviously, environment is a big priority of ours, but many others don't share that priority, and they get support for that. And that, of course, then puts us in a position where we're in a minority in the Parliament and we're jumping and screaming, saying, we should do things differently. But really, we need to have those majorities, and we need to have the public pressure. Without that, nothing changes. And we see that with the climate movement, how much the public pressure can change. And still we're at the point where we're discussing climate law, which is much better than what we had before, but where the governments are still blocking. And so we're just not there. It needs a lot of public pressure, and it needs different political majorities.
Well, and thank you. Sorry, I mean, in terms of pictures, I'm looking from the Commissioner to you, Scan. So it's almost as if the question's passing. I mean, that to me is an obvious then sort of question to Farah, to civil society. Civil society, of course, I'm part of it. We want to see the change which Rashid and science is saying is required. But to some extent, there are, huge numbers of people, increased numbers of people, of young people in the streets, but it's true, not many of them are holding up signs saying better fisheries management is climate action. How do we make, SCA and the Commissioner's job, how do we help them help us type thing? What's missing in terms of that civil society engagement?
Yes, well, I want to say to that, not yet, Mike. We have seen, as Ska mentioned, the increase in sort of concern and urgency around climate. And we have youth groups on the streets striking for the climate and so on. And I think symposiums like this are really important to show what the connection is to the ocean, and civil society groups that work on the ocean in particular are understanding that they have to frame the discussion of the ocean within the climate discussion, right? So because it isn't good enough to talk about fish, protecting fish in their own right, or abstaining from eating fish, or only sourcing sustainable seafood, protecting corals for the sake of it. No, we are learning quite quickly that we need to frame all of this within the climate discussion, and that is happening. I mean, if I look at the coalitions that Women for Oceans is a member of, one of them is the EU for Ocean coalition, which maybe you've heard about. There's about 111 member organizations from around the EU representing millions of citizens. All of them want to see action on the ocean, but without framing it in the climate discussion, it's very hard to get that attention. And I do think that there is a responsibility for civil society, as Ska mentioned, to put that pressure on any number of issues that we're facing when it comes to the ocean: pollution, deep sea mining, as I mentioned, overfishing. So I think this is the beginning of something where we will see more pressure coming. And I really sort of commend you for organizing this symposium, because I think as we will see in this decade of ocean science, there is no escaping the climate science and the climate debate when we talk about restoring our oceans.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that it is a dynamic. I mean, we all have a sort of a part to play. And if I could bring it back to you, Rashid, because when we think back at that initial slide, perhaps of Emma's, with the overlap, like the physical almost overlap between the role of the marine ecosystem, the role that it can play in terms of climate, but then of course the overlapping, ultimately, economic interest. Is there more, and will this series of papers, this series in Frontiers, will that provide more evidence of the economic benefit of, I suppose, valuing the marine habitat more? And I think maybe Beck is a slide 11, sort of was at a presentation we had on Tuesday from Sebastian. Sort of, he talked a little bit to that.
Yeah, so as Beck is looking,
yeah, she's, I think, pulling up, there's two slides. There's a slide from Sebastian Villasante, but then also Rashid, even one of your slides from Monday, I think, talks to that, to some of the evidence that would benefit this discussion.
Yeah, excellent. So I just want to start off with the comments of Member of Parliament Ska, right, and also with Farah's comment. I like the honesty from you, Ska. It's really where the action is. We, the people, have to decide, at least in democracies, right? You cannot tell me you want to protect biodiversity when you go and vote for people who want to just pull everything down and take the money and run home, right? It doesn't work. So we, the people, have to do this. And so there is a lot of role for civil society for all of us. And that is why many of us in universities, in this business, we don't just publish our papers and go to sleep. We talk with people, we visit, I've been to the European Parliament. You wake me up at 1 a.m. like I did 3 days ago in South Africa, I do it in Kenya. You have to get the information out and then help the politicians who want to really do the people's work get voted. So that is very nice. And Farah, you are optimistic, which I like. I mean, we're always on the way. We're pushing hard and we will get people to understand this very well. Now, in terms of economics and policy, I think we really need to think hard. And this picture I put here is, yeah, okay. So where do you want us to start? I talked about, we talk about shadow pricing of carbon. So bringing economics into this and even using things like bonds, because essentially a lot of this is about today, now and the future. Now and the future, we are impatient. People are impatient. We want our benefits now. And we want to push our costs back. We will backload our costs and front load our benefits. And to be able to protect biodiversity, we really have to deal with this. And you can use economic instruments like bonds, green bonds, blue bonds. So what that allows is those of us who are patient can buy off those who are impatient through the market system and protect. So you have those mechanisms. And this picture here is about policy, actually. So this comes to our politicians on board here, is really thinking hard about the relationship between people and nature, whether it's the ocean or nature in general. And I think the responsibility of politicians, and I said it starts with the people, but the people and the politicians, leadership, we do back and forth, right? I mean, leaders have the role to educate their population also, to get the information, let them understand. You don't let the population just push you alone. It's a back and forth, and it's a delicate dance, I know that. So here, this picture is saying, the way we design our policies, we do it in a way that it actually leads to positive feedback from people to nature and nature to people. Take subsidies, for example. I've been in this subsidies fight since, I think my first paper on this was 2002, just when the WTO got the mandate. It's 20 years we cannot get through because of all this short-term and lobbying and the power play, right? But if you look at the theory, you don't subsidize people to go and fish more than the market will support. Even fishing under the market is problematic because it's common property. We have tragedy of the commons. It's like putting fuel to fire when you give people subsidies to go and fish more. And I just find it tough to see why this is so difficult to do. We are not saying take the money out, use the money in the communities, but in ways that support nature, so nature can support people, right? Why is this so hard? Maybe Madam Keller, you can explain why it is so difficult, right? So there are economic instruments, policy instruments that you can use to try to help us. I think Germany has this idea, if I got it right, of paying people to catch plastic rather than catch fish. If you have an overfish stock, you get them to clean up the ocean, they get their livelihood, the fish get a break, the ocean gets clean, it's in a better position to support our food and so on. Why can't we do this kind of policies? And that actually, as an academic, that kind of, I don't understand the politics enough, so that bothers me a lot.
And well, Rashid, you say you don't understand it, but at the same time, as you explain, you've been writing on it and supporting it with your writing for 20 years now. And I'm very conscious that we did, or I did say, that we would only take 45 minutes or so of your time. So if we can maybe sort of move towards some sort of a conclusion, and I guess to invite the panel, if you have any sort of possibly even, because this series isn't finished. I mean, we've had the symposium. The papers are still being worked on. To some extent, it was sort of giving them some air this week and getting some feedback. Rashid, I think they'll be published. We have a target of May? Is it April or May?
Yeah, somewhere middle of the year. That's the goal. Yeah.
So, and one of the outcomes is, I think you mentioned, is this sort of almost checklist. One of the papers will look at almost a practical tool that decision makers could employ in making decisions on fisheries management, but in terms of positive output or improving the state of marine health, of biodiversity, marine biodiversity, in order that it can contribute to climate action. So maybe as a sort of a final word is to invite, particularly Commissioner and Scala, in what would you like to see in order to make your life easier, and in order to add some fuel perhaps to Farah's fire and the fire of civil society. What do we need to hear and what we need to see and read in these reports in the coming when they come out in a couple of months that would really make your jobs easier and perhaps harder at the same time?
Yeah.
Commissioner, if I may.
Okay, if you could maybe formulate question, because you were coming from so far away, and I thought you were addressing Mr. Rashid. If you could formulate the question exactly.
One of the outputs from this series of papers is going to be a checklist for policymakers to support policymakers in making decisions around fisheries management, which will improve marine biodiversity in order that it can then contribute to climate action. The papers are still being worked on. They'll be out in April or May. Is there a particular aspect, if you were looking at a checklist, what type of items would you like to see, every December, I think it is, when the ministers meet to make decisions about fishing limits, what would it be good to know in order to make decisions that have a, let's say, improve ocean health, rather than just how many fish to kill?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, of course, it's always easier to convince people, to convince stakeholders when you have evidence-based. And you know, it doesn't matter in which area. Of course, we're speaking today about oceans, and probably, you know, if we speak, for example, about marine protected areas, to show the benefits of marine protected areas in long term, and to put it in a way that it's a insurance of longevity of the fishing community, of coastal communities, of something that they were proud for many years. I think this is, you know, always helps. Then of course, when we, for example, speak about the control regulation, there will be extremely heated debates, and I already sense the heat is now low, but definitely going to heat up. And here again, if we have, you know, evidence-based solutions that might help us in the debate drastically. Even so, I think some of the arguments are a little bit blown out of proportion, and it's they're easily doable, and as I said, they could protect the fair fishermen and women who do really hard work against the unfair competition. And of course, ensure compliance with the CFP, with EU legislation, especially with the landing obligation, which has been so far so hard to implement properly. And of course, again, you know, when we speak about the same landing obligation, we should show that it really gives a positive result. So in any aspect of it, if you take, it always helps. Discussing, speaking, you know, I'm doing a lot of citizens dialogues. I think the worst thing which you know, was of course absolutely COVID during this mandate, and that we couldn't meet people, coastal communities, talk to them directly, and because those messages sometimes which reaches them, they are very much twisted, and sometimes I think we need just a very honest conversation where they would you know, put out their position, where they would understand our position, where we will share arguments, evidence of reports. That would be a massive help.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, it's Ska, and maybe also from the perspective of Parliament. How can we help you? How can these papers help you?
I have a long wish list, and of course, I mean, I'm elected in order to make sure that we save the climate, save the oceans, no little task. So I'm of course doing the best I can. So I'm not just having wishes for other people, right? We're also trying to do our job here, definitely. But if I'm being asked for wishes, I very much agree with the Commissioner that more data is always useful. But I want to put a but in there. It's a friendly but a lot of the evidence and science is often presented to us parliamentarians in a way that is really not understandable if you have not been following a marine biologist course for the last 20 years. It's impossible to deal with data, with information that is not presented in a way that it's possible for members who have to deal with 50,000 issues every day. You know, I mean, it's not possible for the members to handle that. And I think that's really a big problem. I've seen that so often in committees that we had really valuable input, but everyone was totally lost about what we're saying. And I mean, you have anyway no guarantee that anyone will listen and that they're not busy with other things, but at least you should give people a chance to understand your message and not drown them in 50,000 slides with important numbers and abbreviations that really no one understands. Sorry for being polemic, but I guess you you get what I'm trying to get at.
No, you do, yeah, absolutely. And I also sort of interpret it perhaps as once the papers and the series is published, perhaps there's an opportunity or a benefit in packaging it again in something specific for the Parliament in terms of a workshop or Rashid to contribute something.
Definitely. And I think there's also, I mean, we have a problem that the whole issue of oceans is underrepresented, I think, in the whole public discussion. Again, it's getting better, but fish are really missing a lobby. And I think that's a big problem. I mean, fish are not pandas, unfortunately. They're not fluffy, but they still have a right of their own. And we should have a lobby for that. I think it would be very helpful if civil society can look a bit at, okay, what are the big issues that we need to address? Landing obligation, as the commissioner said, is under a huge pressure, but also we have the biodiversity strategy, the idea to have 30% protected areas. Those are things we can really push together for. And I think it also helps to have a lot of local pressure. I mean, we're now talking about the global or European level, but politicians are very careful about what happens at their local issue level, and they often get addressed by the local fishing industry, but not so much by the local environmentalist community, because very often they think, oh, but the law is European. I mean, that's correct, and so on, so we need to lobby there. But I think it really needs a local effort. But of course, we're doing our efforts here as well, definitely, and you can count on that.
Of course, thank you. And maybe Farah, I mean, I guess obviously, you know, from the civil society perspective, there's, you know, a thing like this checklist, which is going to be produced, is more perhaps of a tool to advocate behind. How do you see, you know, civil society increasing perhaps some of the heat as we conclude, and hopefully, you know, the fire is raging at this stage. How do we, you know, turn up that heat in the coming weeks and months, as you described earlier?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a delicate balance between what, on the one hand, what the commissioner says, that we need evidence and we need science, and as civil society, we're always very careful to base our communications on that science and continue to do so. But on the other hand, as the MEP, as Ska was just saying, that it's also important that we are able to package that in the most sort of succinct, friendly, communicable way possible. And so I think in terms of turning up the heat, this is an emergency, you know, and I think that will even if it's happening slowly, that is being translated at the moment at the local level, at the sort of grassroots level, that we're understanding that we have to protect the ocean if we're going to protect the climate and indeed our futures. So I think we will see that shift. I mean, resources is always an issue, you know, for civil society. We do work with very limited resources, but yeah, I am unfortunately confident, because the outlook is so bleak for our oceans, that we will see more groups taking to the streets. We have, like I mentioned, the EU for Ocean Coalition. There are 60 youth groups within that coalition across Europe that are very concerned about, you know, the fish. We're seeing young people turn to veganism, not necessarily from an animal rights point of view, although personally that's a very important issue for me, but because they're concerned about the way that we're managing our fisheries across Europe, and also the way that you know, we're managing fisheries around the world as the EU fleet. So I think we will see that, and once these young people turn into voters, I hope that they will be able to you know, to translate that into votes. But at the moment, I would urge everybody to support local groups, because as Ska also mentioned, it's one thing lobbying in Brussels, but we need to be lobbying on the ground. I live in a fishing town in the Netherlands, and it would be great to see local groups more active. So I encourage everybody here to support local NGOs on the ground.
Excellent. Thank you. And at this point, just as we come up on 1 hour, which is obviously much longer than we anticipated, we have a last poll for the Beck, I think, for the participants. It'd be great to get the sense of whether or not they feel hotter. They've been fired up in terms of what needs to be done. But then it just lastly to thank you very much to the Commissioner, to Ska, to Farah, and Rashid for taking the time to join us at this virtual fire and to conclude this symposium, this series of discussions. And of course, to remind everyone that you can find the results, both the results, but also the recordings of the 4 series on climateocean.com. Yes, Beck?
Sorry, I was just working out how to start the poll, but we have it. Yes, at climateocean.com, we'll have recordings and the presentations from the whole entire symposium. And
we'll have the series of papers out in shortly in a couple of weeks or months. So do please follow our fish, both in terms of supporting it, but also staying up to date with the issue. And of course, in order to support the Commissioner and SCA in the work that they're doing and joining Farah.
If you haven't noticed, the link to the special issue was provided in the chat room, so you can go there and see the list of papers and the scientists behind them as we work on them, right? So, great.
Indeed, I put the link in there, and then I also put a link in for the report, the Pew report on the implementation of the Common Fisheries Policy, and they are starting a webinar exactly now on that report and on their experience of the last 7 or more years of working on CFP implementation. So I encourage people to join. I put the link
from one webinar to the next.
This is our new Zoom life. But thanks also, I just wanted to also say thanks to all of the panelists for joining. It's been really interesting to get everybody's different views. And it seems we did actually have a second poll, and it was, what is the biggest challenge to treating fisheries management as ecosystem and climate action, basically to help it deliver? And I think everybody's answered that question pretty clearly, that, you know, building political will, building community mobilization and support is actually one of the biggest challenges that we have. So
Rebecca, the checklist, so maybe to give it a name, we're thinking of some checklist, a positive, nature positive management checklist, something like that. I mean, how our managers on the ground can really manage the fisheries with a broader view of nature, because that is the foundation of all the activities connected to fisheries. So.
Okay, I think we really should finish it here, just to say that 80% of the panelists, the participants, hopefully also the panelists, more than 80% feel that they've been fired up by the opportunity of ending overfishing as climate action and biodiversity restoration. So again, thank you very much, Commissioner, SCA, Farah, and Rashid. And let's keep it going. Cool, thank you. And thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.